The deployment of National Guard troops and Marines to Los Angeles is raising concerns about federal overreach. It also raises the specter of a potentially bigger step, martial law. My first guest, Jon Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press, is the author of a new article looking at the history and definition of martial law, and he joins me now. John, always good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John.
Well, thanks for coming in. Well, let's talk about this article. I believe you just posted it this morning. It begins with a story from Terre Haute 90 years ago. Can you tell us what happened there?
Yeah, I described it. It's very similar to what you may have seen happening in Los Angeles. There were protests. There was picketing. National Guard troops were called in. They used tear gas and uses of force. The crowd died down, and that was that. But it wasn't, it wasn't Los Angeles. I used a little misdirection there at the front to draw people in, but yes, it wasn't Los Angeles. It was, like you said, it took place in Terre Haute in 1935. It was a result of our then governor Paul McNutt issuing a state of emergency, and he brought in these federal troops to basically silence a strike at a place called Columbian Enameling and Stamping Works. But there had been some back and forth between striking and non-striking workers, and there had been some unrest in the city, so he declared a state of emergency. That's one of several times nationwide and statewide that's happened.
Yeah. Now, as I understand it, that military law remained in effect for quite a while there until
months,
right?
Yeah. From what I saw different durations, but a figure a lot of people seem to settle on was around 6 months.
Now, as I understand it, the power of the governor when it comes to military law or martial law, that power has been reduced somewhat, right?
Well, yeah, and we don't call it martial law here in the Indiana Constitution. That is not a phrase that appears in the Indiana Constitution. It's not a phrase that appears in the U.S. Constitution. What we call it here is a state of emergency. Okay. So, we've seen lighter versions of that several times. If a large tornado rolls in, flooding, there was a state of emergency, which the press called martial law after the 37 flood, for instance.
Here in Evansville.
Right. So, yeah, we don't call it that, but then we also saw it during the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a health emergency issued, so that gave then Governor Holcomb the power to limit things like how many people could assemble at one time, and that was left up to local law enforcement to enforce, but it was technically by governor's edict not allowed. But that has been reduced since then. If you remember, there was some displeasure from Republicans in the Indiana General Assembly saying that the governor had too much power. Now, if the governor issues a state of emergency, before he could renew it every 30 days. Now, if he renews it twice for 30 days, if he goes beyond 60 days, the Indiana General Assembly can step in and look at whether that needs to continue or not.
I see. So that has changed rather recently. So have you heard some concerns that something like martial law might be issued in today's political climate?
Well, that's why I wrote it, because a lot of people are nervous about things on all ends of the political spectrum. People are nervous, and there were people that I saw on social media, both people I knew and both people I didn't nationally, who were concerned that President Trump could just issue martial law, especially if protests continued. Of course, we have the No Kings protests coming up here tomorrow, and we've had several protests here over the last few weeks. So there was concern of if you keep getting out in the street, he's going to issue martial law and clamp down, and that'll be that, and you won't be allowed to do that anymore. It's much more complicated than that. There's no edict in the Constitution or anywhere that the president can just snap his fingers and people aren't allowed to assemble anymore. There are several steps that can take. He does have a lot of power, obviously. Congress has a lot of power, but it's not something as, overnight we're going to have troops in the street everywhere, and that's just a huge undertaking and a very complicated one.
Yes, indeed. You cite this weekend's planned No Kings protests. As we've heard from NPR, these protests are going on all over the country tomorrow. One here in Evansville, in downtown Evansville. As I understand it, the local organizers, though, are stressing a peaceful protest, correct?
Yes. They, in one of the things that I quoted in this as far as the concerns, came from the Facebook page for that protest, which is They said, this is a quote, "Knowing that tyrants aim to provoke violence as a pretense for enacting emergency powers and further crackdown, it's essential we all commit to a central tenet of the No King's mass mobilization, which is nonviolence." And where they're saying, that tyrants aim to provoke violence, comes from the debate of when these National Guard troops roll in, when police roll in to protests and they turn violent, who's starting the violence, who's provoking it, and sometimes it can go both ways.
Yes, indeed. That is Jon Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press. He's joining us here on the Friday Wrap on WNIN FM. I'm John Gibson. You can find this story and all of John's stories at courierpress.com. Well, John, let's see if we can talk at all about, is there a good definition of exactly what martial law is? Is it simply when civilian government collapses?
That's how the Brennan Center, which is a law center out of New York, that's how they define it. It's, a, quote, "a power that, in an emergency, allows the military to push aside civilian authorities and exercise jurisdiction over the population of a particular area." That happened, I didn't mention it in the article because it happened in 1814. I only have so much space,
Yes.
But after the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, Andrew Jackson imposed martial law down there, and military were arresting people, and civilians were going through military tribunals. So it has happened in the past, but it's rare. That's the definition. But again, that definition is their if of it.
Sure.
There is no if you were to do a Control F through the U.S. Constitution, if that was. If that is possible now, you're not going to find a definition or even the phrase.
Yeah, right. As you say, that phrase isn't even in there anymore.
Again, I'm not an attorney, so maybe it's tucked in there somewhere. But as far as I know, and from what I was told, it's not in there.
Sure. Well, so to that end, I mean, can a president, President Trump or any president, declare martial law or something like it?
Yeah, I talked to Nicholas LaRoe, who's a political science professor over at the University of Southern Indiana, and he used the phrase martial law light, L-I-T-E, which, the president does have a few options, which he's actually talked about, one of which is called the Insurrection Act, which was passed under Thomas Jefferson, I think 1809. I could be wrong on that. I apologize.
A little before my time, yes.
Slightly, yeah. Yes. Apologize to historians if I'm wrong on 1809. But so what it does, it does a couple different things, and it's kind of confusing to read. All laws are confusing for a layperson to read, but it says, whenever there is an insurrection in any state against its government, the president may, upon the request of its legislature or of its government, if the legislature cannot be convened, call into federal service such of the militia of the other states, and it goes on. Basically, they can call in a militia through if they speak to the governor or the state legislature. Now, in California, National Guard came in against Governor Gavin Newsom's wishes, but then later on, there's another section of it which I set aside, which makes no mention of asking the governor first. It just says that the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States has taken place, they can call people in.
Now, I understand that word rebellion was pretty significant in this action, right? I believe at least one news agency asked President Trump, would you consider what's happening in Los Angeles a rebellion?
Oh, an insurrection.
Or an insurrection.
Yeah. So it was ABC News, a reporter there. She asked, do you think an insurrection is occurring in California? And he said no.
Okay.
But of course, he had more to say after that. But yeah, his answer was no, not yet.
Mm-hmm. So, in an update on all of that, a judge last night, Thursday night, blocked President Trump's deployment of troops to L.A., but then an appeals court quickly stopped that measure, so the troops can remain there under President Trump's command for now, correct?
Yeah, I understand it.
Yeah, that's the situation at this point. Well, so, all this discussion of martial law and other steps that might be taken, it's a fascinating story. Any other folks you talked to while you were researching this?
I talked to LaRoe, and I had to do a lot of my own reading for stuff like this, and I had to check it against other people. It's important, I think, while we're talking about the situation in Los Angeles of what the protests are, how they originated, which the people there are protesting raids by immigrations and customs enforcement within the city, which certain operations from ICE happened here as well.
Exactly.
And so a lot of these protests since Trump has taken office have stemmed from that. And there has been some unrest in LA, and there's been a lot of peaceful protests as well.
Right.
So, and I think it's important when we're talking about these things and talking about these fears that we remember what the basis of these protests are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think what really kicked this off for people and maybe sparked some of the fear over martial law, it came from a Democratic senator saying that he was afraid that President Trump could enact martial law, which he legally, at least from that basic term of just turning over all civilian law to the military nationwide, that's just not something that he's that he's allowed to do.
But as we've mentioned, there seem to be these other light possibilities.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what makes it scary and interesting at the same time is that the law is open to interpretation.
Of course, it always is, and that's as we were just mentioning that judge ruled one way last night, and within practically minutes, an appeals court stopped that. So yeah, a lot of interpretation here. As you mentioned, the ICE raids, we've had some here in Evansville. They've been going on all over the country. That has sparked protests in lots of places. Even here in Evansville, there's been some call to stop that or rein it in or what have you. And we will see how these protests go tomorrow. 150 communities, I think, is what we're looking at tomorrow, including one here in Evansville. Hopefully everything will be peaceful and everyone will have an opportunity to state their case. John, as long as your story here, anything else to add that we haven't touched on?
I don't believe so. It's one of those things. I think we're living in a time where we're going to learn a lot about what can legally be done and what can illegally be done. We are living in a time, in a kind of an unprecedented time at this point.
Sure.
And we'll see if what I wrote in this story and the stopgaps that we have actually exist or if they can be papered over.
Yeah, the stopgaps, the guardrails, that kind of thing. Yes, indeed. That is Jon Webb of the Evansville Courier and Press. He's the author of that new article that looks at the history and definition of martial law. You can find that story and others at courierpress.com. John, as always, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Nice conversation there.